Screening Room and Media Arts Literacy Lab. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And I'd like to first off hand the mic over to Mayor Emmett Jordan for a few opening remarks.
You know, I just really want to congratulate you and the Friends of the Greenbelt Theatre for bringing us to this point. This movie theater, since 1937, has been one of the real focal points, the center of activity in Greenbelt. So, you know, to be here today, back in 2015, when the city renovated the theater and actually signed the contract with the Friends of the Greenbelt Theater to manage the space for us. You know, it was a difficult time, and the nonprofit, the 501c3, was very, very new. So, you know, to have actually sustained the theater through COVID over the past 3 years, not only sustained it, but actually grew the donor base and brought us to the point where you're opening this screening room and learning lab. It's really incredible. So, I'd like to ask for a round of applause.
So thank you to Mayor Jordan and all of Greenbelt City Council, especially those here with us tonight, Mayor Pro Tem Kristen Weaver, and Council Members Jay Davis, Sylvie Pope, and Rick Gordon. I can't overstate the challenges of the last 2 years for nonprofit arts organizations. So many have ceased to exist. The support we were able to access from all levels of government is the reason we are still here today and able to look to the future with the opening of this new space. So thank you. My vision for the second screening room and education space took inspiration from this original theater and Greenbelt's founding, although not quite how you might think. In 1938, the old Greenbelt Theater opened. And in 1938, the filmmaking team of Ralph Steiner and Willard Van Dyke came to Greenbelt to film The City, a documentary about the perils of poorly planned urban centers and the promise of a utopian progressive community like Greenbelt. The film was made to be shown at the 1939 New York World's Fair. As all World's Fairs, an event that was meant to showcase the possibilities of the future. I love the thought that the cinema's history functions as a way to look back on and to appreciate the past, but at the same time, central to that history is imagining a better tomorrow. So we are guided by both, by the town's progressive ideals, as well as by the recognition of the continual gap between those ideals and realities of exclusion. This new space, too, looks back at the cinema's inspiring ethos while imagining a better, more equitable future. And thank you to the Friends of Greenbelt Theatre Board. This group of dedicated volunteers bring their time and talents to the strategic planning and vision for the organization. I am deeply grateful for their insights and support. Thank you to our chair, Kathy Jones, Vice Chair, Tim Murray, Secretary Michael Bloom, and board members Superjeet Chowdhury, Heather Scott Bashir, Mary Helen Washington, Adrian Haddad, Christy McGee, and Connie Barber. Thanks also to our fantastic staff. I hope they can hear me say this. They're probably still bustling around in the back. For years now, Amy Niesel has been the friendly, helpful voice you hear on the phone, and Lucy Cortez is the friendly, helpful face greeting you when you come in. But they are much more than that, especially during these past 2 years. Together, we scrambled to keep the ship upright, and that would not have been possible without Amy and Lucy. And thank you to our front of house staff who are busy prepping for the rest of this evening's festivities. Adam Campanile, Adam Jorgensen, Idina Patterson-Cook, Jojo Gelati, and Annalise Ontiveros. That's everyone employed by OGT, but of course we rely not just on our staff, but also on our members and donors. So a hearty thank you to everyone who supported the Beyond the Screen fundraiser. We had just completed our Save Me a Seat renovation of the original cinema here where we are tonight when the opportunity arose to create a screening room and educational space. You didn't hesitate. You saw the vision and jumped on board, funding over a quarter of the cost for the new space. Thank you. So thanks again to every one of you who supported us during the pandemic, by ordering popcorn from our curbside service, by coming to an outdoor movie, by making a donation to the real magic of the holidays, by booking a private rental, or writing an encouraging note. We passed those notes around in the office and we even taped them to the walls. Thank you. It all kept us going during the most challenging times. We most definitely got here together. I like to ask you to give yourselves, our OGT community, a round of applause. Thank you. And this brings me to our special guest for this evening, who is here to discuss the power of the movies, the role of art house cinemas in their communities, and the state of the industry in general. For more than 3 decades, Bob Mondello has reviewed movies and covered the arts for NPR, seeing at least 300 films annually. Then sharing the critiques and commentaries about the most intriguing on NPR's award-winning news magazine, All Things Considered. Mondello has also written about the arts for USA Today, The Washington Post, Preservation Magazine, and other publications, and has appeared as an arts commentator on commercial and public television stations. He spent 25 years reviewing live theater for Washington City Paper, DC's leading alternative weekly, and to this day he remains enamored of the stage. Before becoming a professional critic, Mondello learned the ins and outs of the film industry by heading the public relations department for a chain of movie theaters, and he reveled in film history as advertising director for an independent repertory theater. It is my distinct honor to welcome to the stage NPR's Bob Mondello.
Now I have to figure out how to use the microphone.
I think you're doing just fine. You must have more experience than most with microphones.
Well, probably.
So, I actually am really intrigued by the mention in your biography that I just described that you worked in theaters in D.C. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
That was my first job out of college. When you're a movie critic in college, the best thing about that is the free tickets. And I had been writing for the University of Maryland Diamondback for several years at that point, more years than 4, unfortunately. And I realized that the tickets were now going to dry up, and one way of getting tickets was to work for a chain of movie theaters. I worked for Roth Theaters, which used to own a lot of suburban houses around this area, and owned some other theaters elsewhere. Then after I'd been working for them for a while, I was doing their advertising because part of the reason you become a critic is you love the form, right? You want to keep on talking about it. And so this gave me an opportunity to sell things I liked. It also meant that I had to sell a lot of things that were really terrible, which was not my favorite part of the job. And then David Levy, who owned the Charles Theater in Baltimore and the Key Theater downtown in Washington, asked me if I would do some of his programs because he had a repertory theater. He played 2 shows a night most of the time. And so, like the Biograph and the Circle Theater downtown, I don't know if you're probably all not old enough to remember this. So anyway, I was doing programs for him for the Charles, and I got to meet people like John Waters and Divine, who showed up for the screening of Polyester at the Key Theater downtown. And so I got to do all those kinds of things. And I'm totally enamored of the kind of film that's shown in an art house as opposed to in a commercial theater. And that's my whole career has always been about the sort of, in theater it was about the Alcoff Kennedy Center stuff, right? The storefronts. And in film, there is only one place in the country that I could review films like Petite Maman, right? And so I'm lucky to be at All Things Considered. What happened was I was doing a whole lot of advertising work, and in the meantime I was writing for City Paper about theater. The premise being that I really shouldn't be reviewing films and advertising, quoting myself in my ads would be a little much. And so I was reviewing theater, and one time I didn't have any place to jump. I wrote for every small newspaper in Washington that ever collapsed. If it was about to go out of business, I was its theater critic for the last 6 months. And I kept jumping from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And one time when I was going to jump, there was no other paper to jump to. And I was listening that morning on, and they had somebody different every week, and I thought, oh, they must be trying people out. Maybe they'll give me a shot. And so I went in and I did a piece for them, just adapting, because I wrote advertising copy. I was used to writing for voice, and so I got the chance to switch to take one of my reviews from one of the small papers and turn it into a radio piece, which basically means taking out about 3/4 of the words. And I tried it, and it went okay, and they kept using me. And what I didn't realize was that the folks who were working on All Things Considered were hearing my pieces cut into Morning Edition for the local broadcast here. And so when I called them finally about a year later, and to propose a piece, they had been hearing my voice with their voices for a while, and they thought that was fine. And so they just had me come in. And it was the easiest thing in the world. However, I was a freelancer for 17 years before they hired me. But I've now been doing it for 38 years.
Oh,
so
wow, okay.
It's been much.
Yeah. So what was the switch like going from, I mean, you say you were writing for advertising, so it was writing for voice, but were there other things you noticed from sort of the reviewing of things for print? Like, how do you feel that switch to radio?
I can't write for print anymore. I've forgotten how, kind of. The thing about, if you listen to National Public Radio, you know that we try to have, we try to have a lot of sound in the pieces. And so I build my reviews around the sound that I have. And I actually don't know how to write well for print anymore. I used to be pretty good at it, but it's hard now just to not have the sound to bounce from. So that if I'm doing a review of the new Downton Abbey movie, I'll have the music behind it, and it sort of propels what you're doing. When you're working in radio, if you play a clip from something, you don't have to say what the actor sounds like. You don't have to talk about the kind of drama that there is. You can play a little bit of the drama, so you're freed up. It does a lot of the work for you. I was on WETA for a long time on a show called Around Town, and before that, this is really dark ages. I was on WJLA as their 5 o'clock movie critic. And what I discovered really early in doing that was that nobody actually listens to what you're saying on television. And it hadn't really registered. When I remember doing, I think it was a Michael Mann movie, just a really dumb action film. And I thought it was really terrible and was saying that. But the guy who helped me edit my review, it did the visuals for television, had put all these action scenes behind me as I was talking. And at the end of it, we came out, and Paul Berry, who was the anchor, looked at me and said, "That looks really good." And I said, "But I was just saying how terrible it was." And I learned that you should, when you're on TV, you can talk about the things that people listen again. The other thing was that people could always tell me what I had worn the week before. On radio, they generally heard what I said, which is a much nicer experience.
Right. What motivates you in choosing the films that you do? And to me, as a film historian, I often find things, no matter how bad the movie, there's something interesting that can be said about it. So I'm wondering how you do that.
Well, listen, there's a really simple thing that happens, which is that if they're going to give me 3.5 minutes on a national broadcast to talk about something, I better sort of like it, right? So I choose movies that I like. Now, I make a special exception for movies that are so big and so advertised that even if I dislike them, it's worth my telling people about it. But even with those, you have to be careful about how you say that you don't like something. I had a student one time reviewing a production of Dracula. And as his opening line, he thought it was very clever, and he's right, I guess, but his opening line was, "Dracula sucks." Which is clever, but there's nowhere to go from there. You've now said it, and what are you going to say after that? So if you don't like something and you're going to talk about it for 3.5 minutes, you kind of have to start with the things that you do like about it. And People put millions and millions of dollars into movies. It's really rare that there's something completely worthless. No. It's not invariable, but it's really rare. Most things with Mel Gibson are the other side of that, but it's, I'm sorry, I really don't like him. I will eventually have to review it again, I'm sure. I've managed to avoid it so far. So anyway, if I'm already allowed to choose things that I think are essentially interesting in some way, right, and then to talk about those things, even if it's just a Marvel movie, they're invariably doing something that is kind of clever. Listen, the person that I modeled my career on was Walter Kerr. He used to write theater reviews for the New York Times, and before that for the New York Herald Tribune, and he was a teacher at Catholic University here in town. And he was a really elegant writer, and I always felt as if when he was looking at a play, he would find some grace note that he could talk about, or he'd sort of wrap you up in the experience before he told you what he thought of it. And that is a really good model for doing radio reviews, because you kind of have to get everybody on the same page. If I'm talking about Petite Maman, for instance, it's not like it has a big national ad campaign. The public doesn't know what that movie is until we tell them about it.
So I wonder, how you see the way that you do it in light of the increasing polarization of the country and the kind of hot takes approach that people have, the sort of Rotten Tomatoes aggregation of reviews.
Right. Well, I have the advantage that the NPR audience is like the greatest audience in the world. We assume that they are better educated and more thoughtful than most people out in the world. And so I'm talking to an audience that wants some kind of interpretation, analysis, and depth, and all those kinds of things. So that's really helpful just to start with. If all you want to know is thumbs up or thumbs down, which is, that's true of people for like the Marvel movies, right? Actually, they only want to know thumbs up. But if that's all you want, you're not listening to me. So because to be honest, you might not know at the end of my review if I liked it. You should be able to tell whether you'll like it, which is what I'm trying to do. If I describe something well enough, then you can decide whether you want to see that. I mean, as a practical matter now, movies are sort of splintered the way that broadcasting is splintered and all kinds of things. And there's an audience for horror movies, for instance, or for Marvel movies, or for romantic comedies. And if I describe the event of the movie, you'll know whether that's for you, I think. And you'll get a sense of whether I thought the performances were good, that kind of thing. But I don't regard it as the important part of a review to say, yes, it's good, or no, it's not good. What's important is to try and analyze how the director or the actor did what it is that they're doing, and that's always the interesting part.
Yeah, and so if you see 300 movies a year, how do you choose which ones you decide to write reviews of?
Oh, that's easy. No, I mean, most of you probably go to somewhat fewer than 300 movies a year, and you probably like. I mean, you're going only to the ones that you get to choose, right? The ones that you decided to spend money on. And you still enjoy, what, 20% of them? A lot, maybe? For me, if I'm really lucky in a year, I'll see 10% movies that I like and a whole bunch that I don't. So that'll get me, 30 films reviews. And I do about 65 or 70 every year.
When I was in grad school, they showed that the student film club, and I thought, well, I'm a film student, I can go. But right in front of me was a couple, and he had clearly not told her what they were coming to see. And so all night I watched her go, she was not happy, so I had a sort of double experience there. My other film experience like that in Chicago was going to the Gene Siskel Center, and they were showing Un Chien Andalou. And there were clearly a couple of women they were sitting behind me, and when the eye slicing moment happened, one of them said, "Oh my God!" and looked at the booth like it was their fault. they were very upset. So, yeah. So the theater is a wonderful place to experience all kinds of things.
You know, when I was growing up, when I was in college, movies, it was a golden age for foreign films in this country, right? Cousin Cuisine would come out one week, and I Am Curious Yellow the next week, and you got all kinds of movies that were not Hollywood product. And I grew up with that, and I just assumed that was going to keep going, right? And it didn't. I also grew up at a time when I could go to the Circle Theater downtown and see a double feature. There were three movies that, when I was in college, I dearly loved: Harold and Maude, and 1,000 Clowns, and The King of Hearts. Getting a lot of yeses on this. And they showed those in various combinations. So you could Harold and Maude and The King of Hearts, or Harold and Maude and 1,000 Clowns, or 1,000 Clowns and King of Hearts. And I think I watched it every time one of those came around. And I ended up having seen Harold and Maude 19 times by the time that I did an ad campaign for it when it played in the suburbs later for Raw Theaters. And I learned so much about movies through those things. And one time, Dave Levy at the Key Theater did a Silent Clowns festival that had, at every showing you would see it was a double feature plus a short subject. And there would be, one of those three films would be Harold Lloyd, one would be Buster Keaton, and one would be Charlie Chaplin, for a month. And at the end of that month, I knew silent film. I really did. I still write about it all the time because it's tricky on radio. But I love silent film to this day, and I'm forever trying to talk people into just showing them. When he was showing those films, it was all based on a book by Walter Kerr, who was my hero. And they had a guy named Lee Irwin, who was an organist who had played for silent movies back in their heyday. And they set him up with a little, two keyboards. One was a sort of an electric piano, and the other one was an organ. And he'd play along, and one day, it was just a remarkable moment. The film broke. You know, there was this film back in the days when we ran through projectors, and the film broke. And you know how when the film breaks, the projectionist is instantly scrambling, and the whole audience gets up and starts moaning and everything. But you've got this guy playing music in the front, and it had been a chase, and he just slowed it down to a sort of a more sedate thing and kept playing. And not a soul got up. And after about 5 minutes, I thought, you know, they may not know that the film broke. And the projectionist was talking to the concessions girl, and had no idea anything had happened because nobody had come out and said anything. So, anyway, he went up and he started up again, and as soon as it started up, you know, we're back to the chase. You know, the premise of the multiplex, of the megaplex, if you have 24 screens, the idea was that 5 or 6 of them would be showing rather esoteric fare, and that's why they're different sizes and all that kind of thing. So you have smaller houses, you can put the foreign film in there for 12 weeks. What actually happens is that Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness plays on 16 screens. And, you know, that gives them a lot of show times, and it's great, but the ones that you actually want to see don't play there at all, which is why theaters like this are so essential. I mean, I don't know what we do without you. I really don't. Back in the 1950s, when they first widened the screen because television came into play, it was a way of saying, this is something you can't see on the small screen. That won't make sense, right? Lawrence of Arabia would fill this enormous screen in front of you, and there was no way that was going to be shown on TV the way it was. And in fact, when they reduced it for television, they had to sort of show you, right, they had to do a pan and scan thing so that they showed you a portion of the screen. when we ran the Ross College Park, it's right in the center of College Park. It was right there. And it was a storefront that we converted. And one of the first films we showed there was Airplane, the comedy that's, you know, and I had to draw attention to the theater somehow. And so I looked, I forgot how I looked this up, but I found the fuselage of a crashed single-engine plane, just a little, you know, and so it still had the wings and the tail section, but the front of it was destroyed. And I bought it for $50 from a junkyard in somewhere in Pennsylvania. And we brought it back down to the theater, and I had an usher with me up on the roof, and we were attaching it to the marquee, right? So it would stick out of the marquee. I thought that was a clever, it was right on Route 1, everybody would see it. And the way I knew we had gotten it right was I hear this screech of brakes behind us, and I look down, and this guy yelled, "Is everybody okay?"
Well, I think that's the perfect place to stop. I couldn't agree with you more. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. You may hear this a lot. It's a real pleasure and a little bit strange to hear your voice coming out of you and on my radio. I hope you all have that experience too. And I just want to please join me and thank you, Bob Mondello, again for coming. Emma, do you want to be here with me? Okay, how there you go. All right. Yes, it's good. All right, everybody, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We've had a wonderful evening so far, and we're thrilled to show you this new space. We're very excited that this is the inaugural event for the Screening Room and Media Arts Literacy Lab here at OGT. So everybody, just look forward for much more to come in terms of education and more great programming from OGT. All right, here we go. Ready? And now we have refreshments and wine. So please come in and we'll have stations throughout so you can learn more all about the programming. All right, yeah, the wine. What's that? Yeah, my